Good morning, everybody. My name is Florence and I am the HCPC Professional Liaison Consultant for Northern Ireland. Alongside me today is Fiona Brown, the Director of Education Standards and Development at the General Osteopathic Council, and we have partnered together to bring you this event today. So thank you very much for joining us. Now, before we start, can I just take you through some of the housekeeping, and that'll help you get the most out of our time together today. So you'll see a copy of the slides there will be shared with you. And when you receive them, do feel free to share them with any colleagues within your network as well. We did get some questions about that, so that's no problem. Now, due to the large numbers, the microphones and the cameras are turned off, as usual, but we do want a bit of interaction. So please feel free to use the reaction buttons at any time, and there will be prompts as well for you to do that too. So please do interact with us. Post some questions as well in the Q&A. Thanks for the thumbs up. We have a small team of moderators there who will get to as many of your questions as possible, but we'll also be developing a fuller FAQ to cover the ones that we miss. There will also be opportunities to vote as well during our session, so please use your mobile phones when you're prompted to do so you can get them ready. Now, the voting is anonymous, but it provides us with very helpful feedback, so do be as honest as you can. And again, we'll share the results of those with you afterwards as well. Now, we're using PowerPoint Live today, so you can go back and forward to a slide if that's what you wish to do so, and then return to the presenter. It doesn't affect anybody else. So if you momentarily switch off and forget what we're talking about, you can go back and see what it was. That's no problem. And then the links that you see are also live, so you can be directed to other resources as well immediately as we go along. Now, there are no certificates, and we know that everybody loves to get a wee certificate for participation, but you don't need one. But what we would encourage you to do is to complete a short reflective piece afterwards. So you might want to save maybe a copy of your voting as you go along to help you with that. Now, you can see here on the screen, this is the content for the webinar for today. And really the content has been guided by the questions that you shared with us whenever you registered. And then also we've had a lot of talks with different stakeholders beforehand, just as we've prepared. So with people like professional bodies, with our registrants, with academics, with strategic leaders, and many, many, many more just in the lead up to today. Now, the HCPC is the regulator for 15 different professions, and we work alongside other regulators as well, including the General Osteopathic Council, and that's to regulate a broad range of professions, including those under the umbrella of allied health professions, that's our AHPs, biomedical scientists, clinical scientists, practitioner psychologists, and hearing aid dispensers. As regulators, our role is established by statute and Act of Parliament. And in our case, this is the Health Professions Order 2001 and the Osteopaths Act 1993. And the orders clearly set out what our overriding objective is, and that is to protect the public. And of course, the public is all of us too. Now, also on this slide, you can see the values of the HCPC and the GOsC, which side by side demonstrate the commonalities in the way that we go about our work. So I'd like now just to introduce you to Fiona from the GOsC, and she is going to provide an overview of some of the work that we do as regulators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florence, and hello. On this slide, you'll see the key functions of regulators such as the HCPC and the GOsC. We take action to protect the public, including via fitness to practice. We quality assure education and training programmes, maintain and develop standards, and publish a register of those allowed to practice by law in the UK. We also provide sessions like this one today, which helps us to get involved further upstream to support people to use our standards in actual practice. Therefore, regulators also work in a preventative capacity to support all registrants and those who manage them. And this gives us a greater opportunity to influence, collaborate and support all our interested parties and registrants. With that in mind, we're going to hand over to Steph today, who will lead us through the rest of the session. She'll introduce herself shortly. Steph was brought in to work on this project as a clinical fellow and to use her knowledge and skills as an HCPC registrant to support this work. So over to you, Steph. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Florence, and welcome everyone to our session today. My name's Steph, and I'll be taking you through the rest of the webinar today. By way of introduction, as Fiona said, I'm a registrant. I have been since 1997, when I qualified as an occupational therapist. So I thought I'd share with you a little bit about my own scope of practice so far. So my identity sits very much within my profession, but I also see myself as an allied health professional and a member of that broader healthcare workforce team. And I'd like us also to remember that that's a team that extends across many sectors and settings, as we'll talk about today. My scope of practice, a bit like a river, has taken many twists and turns as I've gained different experiences in my career so far. I started working off clinically. I chose to specialise in neurology and neurosciences, advancing in my career with additional master's level education within the specialty. Whilst working clinically, I supported the learning of others, including students on placements. I led a small team, including delegating to and supervising assistants, technicians and other registrants. And I engaged in service development, audit and research activities that were the right size for the various roles and job titles I had during that time. I subsequently chose to divert my career river and appropriately widen my scope of practice with a move into higher education. I worked as a lecturer, which also enabled me to further my knowledge and skills through PhD level education as well. Since 2016, I can't believe it's been that long, but since 2016, I've taken several roles with a specific focus on learning and workforce development. So I've sort of altered my specialism a little bit, and now my specialism is workforce learning and development. I've taken roles with my professional body, this role with my regulator, and also as an independent contractor. Throughout this time, I still see myself as an occupational therapist and AHP. So I don't use the phrase one by background. I still see that my professional knowledge and skills foreground the work that I do, albeit in very different ways to my first hospital roles. So that's a bit about who I am and my scope of practice so far. And I know that all of you in the room today will have your own unique career rivers and stories to tell as you navigate your own pathways based on what works for you. Let's have a go at practicing with the reaction buttons, because a little bit of engagement and knowing you're in the room with me is really lovely. So you'll see that you've got two buttons, that raise and react at the top. React is the smiley face. Thank you. And there's the thumbs up to show. So as we're going along, I will prompt you to use these where oh, I like the smiley faces as well. Thank you for a Wednesday morning. I'll prompt you to use the reaction buttons, but equally, as if something lands really well and you're like, yes, that's an important point, we've got a team behind the scenes noticing when people react as well. So please do engage with us and tell us your thoughts as we go along. So in this session, we've got about an hour together. We want to provide an overview of what the standards say about scope of practice, and this is to support you as an experienced practitioner. We're going to explore some of the key concepts and the terms around experienced practitioners that are used within and across the UK context, linking to advancing levels of practice. We're also going to share some of the relevant resources, and as Florence said, those hyperlinks are live, so you can click on things as we go, open them up in a second browser, and then you've got them there for afterwards. In your busy worlds with everything you juggle, I would love this next 50 minutes or so to be a space for you. I want to provide a space where you think about your own responses to scope of practice, to what the standards say, to the information that we're sharing, and also in relation to how your scope of practice informs your CPD activities for renewal and registrations. And then right at the end, in a good old outcome-focused way, as registrants that we are, I'm going to invite you to identify a very small action to be completed within the next 2 weeks. I'd like you to be able to just identify something really small and doable that you can take away as key learning from this session, and also tell us what that is, because again, that helps us. So here are the key concepts we're going to work through together as we clarify some of the work around scope of practice. So we're going to touch on reminding ourselves the definition of service user, look at levels of practice, the advanced levels of practice. We're going to touch on the concept of being an autonomous practitioner, wrestle with the phrase scope optimization, specifically look at advanced practice as one of the levels, touch on the 4 pillars of practice, and the concept of specialist versus generalist. So these are the things we're going to cover along the way, all inform the concept of scope of practice. So we'll talk about them. I'll try my best to link as many resources and share practical examples and stories as we go along. I'm also keen to show where there's alignment in the work of the regulators, the professional bodies, other national bodies and yourselves. So here's the first one, service user. As we go through our session today, please bear in mind that service user is a broad phrase. So HCPC and GOsC see the term service user as anyone who is affected by the services of professionals. So this shows that as registrants, we serve a wide range of people, including but not limited to people who are accessing our services for health, such as patients, carers, families, people living with health conditions. So service users also means the people that we manage, the learners and students we support, research participants in our studies, system leaders, colleagues in the same profession, colleagues who work in different regulated professions, and other colleagues, including those who are not required to register with a regulator, such as our support workforce, and many, many more. I'm sure you can think of some that I may have missed out. So as we go through our session today, please hold this definition in mind. So when we're talking about CPD, for example, and how it leads to benefit service users, these service users are a broad range of people. Okay, so brace yourself. This is one of the longer slides, so I thought I'd start with it. We're going to talk about levels of practice. This concept is arguably the most complex one, which is why I thought I'd start with it. So before I go into it in detail, I'm going to tell you the 5 key points that I would really like you to take away from this slide. The first one is that there are different levels of practice, which encompass many different roles across sectors. As we advance in our careers through experience and sometimes with additional qualifications. So you'll see this example, the levels of practice being supportive, assistive, entry, enhanced, advanced consultant, and then that pre-entry level of our pre-reg learners preparing to enter the workforce. The second point is that HCPC and GOsC registrants are considered autonomous at the point of registration. The third point is that autonomy must be seen as freedom, but within a regulatory framework. As registrants, we must work within the limits of our individual knowledge and skills, our job descriptions for those of us who are in substantive posts within organisations, and we must also know when to refer to others. So autonomy, this is what autonomy means, freedom, but within a regulatory framework. The fourth point that I'd like you to take away is that HCPC and GOsC do not set additional standards for each level of practice. And I'll share with you the standards that are the foundations later. And the fifth point is that public safety, public protection, and professional credibility run as central themes regardless of the level of practice and employment status. Okay, so let's explore these in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we need to acknowledge the definitions and the wording around levels of practice have come from one part of our sector. So they've come really from the health part. So I appreciate they may sound a little bit unfamiliar to people attending today who work in social care, local authority, private sector, justice sector, and the many, many places where we work as registrants. However, many professional body frameworks, which you may or may not be familiar with already, across all sectors and UK nations, have adopted this sort of language or versions of this language in their professional development frameworks. So, and these professional frameworks are meant to cut across all sectors and UK nations. The key point here is that many job titles can be enacted at different levels, and that jobs will also vary in their associated pay bands and spine points. From a regulatory perspective, pay points, there isn't an explicit relationship between a level of practice and a specific pay point. But I appreciate this is a common and a valid source of concern, but issues of pay terms and conditions and working conditions, they sit beyond the remit of the regulators and sit within the workforce. The second issue here is about the phrase advanced levels of practice. I don't know how familiar you are with this phrase. So you sometimes see the phrase advanced levels of practice, and that refers to these three distinct but overlapping levels. Now in England and Wales, they tend to be called enhanced advanced consultant. In Scotland and Northern Ireland, the levels are referred to as specialist advanced consultant. So there's a slight differing in terminology across the UK countries, which can sometimes add to the complexity of this work. So for example, we'll see the word specialist later on can also mean scope of practice rather than a level. So I think this is something that we just need to acknowledge as a reality. We're working with evolving concepts. And when I think about it, most of these levels didn't explicitly exist for AHPs when I qualified back in 1997. So to me, I see this as where we are in a moment in time. In a positive way, it shows the substantial progress that has been made in trying to define and conceptualize workforce development for us as registrants in a way that just really wasn't there a few decades ago. As registrants, we move through these different levels of practice. As we do so, we become equipped to manage increasing levels of complexity and uncertainty and risk in our work. This is something, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, it requires time, experience, and sometimes additional qualifications. So the important point here is we don't gain our place on the register and start working the next day in advanced roles. Sometimes we get questions from people that, if I've done a master's pre-reg qualification, does that mean I can move through the levels quicker? And it doesn't. It means that you've achieved master's level thinking and you have master's level critical thinking, but you don't have the experience, that postgraduate experience and knowledge that comes with time and experience. At all times throughout our careers, we must ensure we're working within our knowledge, our skills and our experience. I'm identifying areas for growth. None of us are fully developed. None of us have got there. We have all got room to grow. So we all need to identify those areas for growth to support our CPD. Now, as I said earlier, all people who are registered with the HCPC and GOsC are deemed autonomous practitioners at the point of entry to the workforce. So the important point here is that autonomy is a key feature of all career levels rather than a defining feature of one. So at the advanced and consultant levels of practice, you'll be exercising significant levels of autonomy and judgment and responsibility. You're managing high levels of complexity in your roles because you've got the experience and sometimes the additional qualifications to do so. At all times, we remain responsible for our decisions and our actions, and that includes knowing when to refer on. So even at the advanced and consultant levels, we must know the limits and the boundaries of our scope, our individual and professional scope, and know that when we see something in front of us, actually that is the opportunity to refer on to other people. We must also know when to respect service user autonomy as well. Now, there's sometimes also confusion. You can see why this is a longer, complex slide. I am getting there. But there's also some confusion with specific advanced roles versus advanced levels of practice. So you may see this in the system as well. For example, the role that's named Advanced Clinical Practitioner, ACP, can sometimes be conflated with the entire advanced practice level. But the point to make here is that ACP, Advanced Clinical Practitioner, is one role within that level. Whilst the advanced level of practice, that level can be enacted in many different roles across sectors and settings and with many different job titles. So there is some confusion and conflation there. As healthcare regulators, HCPC and GOsC do not require additional regulation for each level of practice. As we become more experienced, we appropriately extend our core skills that were required from us to be registered in the first place. There are exceptions, and these are generally additional activities that are regulated by law, for example, prescribing. And let's touch on that whilst we're here. It's a matter for the government to decide which professions can and can't prescribe, and lobbying from professional bodies, but not regulators, can influence this, and we're seeing that at the moment. Registrants with prescribing rights are required to undertake an HCPC approved qualification, comply with the HCPC standards for prescribing, and will have this activity annotated on the register to recognise it is within their individual and profession's scope of practice. But again, this one activity isn't a defining feature of an entire level of practice. So we're nearly there with this slide, and there are frameworks, including those from the professional bodies. So this diagram, as you'll see from the reference, is taken from the Dietetic Career Development Framework. And these frameworks can help to inform and guide you as practitioners through the different levels of practice, including to help us identify how to keep up to date and appropriately grow our individual scope of practice through CPD. We'll touch on that point later as well. So to recap on this slide, when we refer to advanced levels of practice, it is not in any way restricted to one specific role, but applies to all practitioners in whatever context. So, for example, a podiatrist in private practice, an occupational therapist working in an expert witness medico-legal work, an advanced speech and language therapist in a prison, and others. All HCPC and GOsC registrants are autonomous at the point of registration, but must work within the limits of our knowledge and skills and where appropriate job descriptions. And HCPC and GOsC do not set additional regulatory standards for each level of practice. So like I said, this is one of the more fuller and complex detailed topics we're exploring today, and I'm grateful for the reactions we've seen, but I'm just going to ask for one reaction as a pause now. Can you give me a thumbs up if you feel comfortable with all of this information? Or please use any other reaction that sees fit. Thank you. And like I said, we're asking for these reactions to help gain an understanding. There's a phase 2 of this project, which I'll talk about in a moment. So your engagement with this and the questions that you're putting in the Q&A function will be helping to guide that. Okay, we'll be moving on to something quicker now. The rest of the slides aren't as detailed, but this one is important. What do we mean by scope of practice? So your scope of practice is the area or areas of your profession in which you have the knowledge, skills and experience to practice lawfully, safely and effectively in a way that meets the standards and does not pose danger to the public or yourself. So when we're talking about scope of practice, it is very much linked to what Florence was saying at the start about the primary role of standards and regulation is to protect the public. So all registrants, regardless of levels of practice, must adhere to the same standards and must operate within their scope of practice at every career stage. You'll see here on the slides that there are profession-specific standards, I always trip on that phrase, as additions. So there's the general standards for everyone, they've been embedded into the profession-specific ones, and then there are a few extra for individual professions. The standards and scope of practice remain the strong foundational bedrock for all professional activity. We'll discuss later how scope of practice evolves. It's not a static entity. It evolves over time with experience. Now, the next bit can sometimes cause a bit of frustration, and I do get that, but it's important that our scope of practice is not a list of activities. And the reason why is this could stifle innovation and unnecessarily restrict our ability to optimise and grow the scope of our professional practice to meet the ever-changing and often more complex needs of our service users. And by way of example, in the 1980s and the 1990s, radiographers weren't involved in cannulation, but you fast forward to now and with additional training, this is an embedded task, including for some people at band 5. So, this example shows how a profession's scope of practice evolves over time, both with, and think about your own practices and how different they were, and the content that was in your pre-registration programs, and what you came out learning, and maybe what the new pre-reg students are coming out with now. So, which is why a list of activities would really stifle that profession-specific growth. We'll also be exploring the two interrelated elements of scope of practice in a bit. So hold on to the idea that there is a profession's scope of practice, but also an individual's scope of practice, both of which are dependent on professional judgment and reasoning. The standards and scope of practice guidance are there to support you as you develop into more advanced levels of practice. So this is what the HCPC standards say. And note how the standards require you to undertake additional training, but it doesn't mandate that this must be a specific type. So it doesn't say it must be a formal qualification. This will be dependent on your context. So the standards refer to that broader definition of service user that I mentioned right at the start as well. And this is something that we must bear in mind, because if our service users are staff that we manage, or strategic leaders, then our additional qualifications may be linked to broader learning. We might want to do a leadership qualification, a change management qualification. Our CPD may need to be linked to learning to meet the needs of a wide range of service users. I've said it before, but it's always worth reiterating: to work within our scope of practice, we must take responsibility and accountability for our decisions and actions. However, there are also responsibilities for other people, such as our employers. And we're delivering this session to employers and line managers. It's the same slide deck, but the narrative is slightly different, but we are reinforcing the multiple responsibilities and roles in supporting everyone to meet their regulatory requirements. These are the standards from GOsC. As you can see here, there is alignment between the regulators in the standards relating to scope of practice. You'll see there are central themes about the need to work within our knowledge and skills, to take responsibility and accountability for our actions, and to know when and how to refer on. This statement encapsulates the point about scope of practice functioning as a living and evolving concept. It develops with you and requires you to use your professional judgment about what you can do and or your profession can do. This statement speaks to scope of practice narrowing over time, but it can also broaden depending on the needs of your service users. As we grow our scope of practice, we need to do so carefully. And I wanted these quotes to come in here because these are so important. They're quotes from service user engagement research conducted by the HCPC in 2020. The quotes from service users reinforce the importance of working within our scope of practice and being able to articulate who we are and what we do in all of our roles, so people feel safe. And that's the bit to take away. People need and want to feel safe when they work with us. Our service users want to know who we are. They want to know what we can do. They want to know what we can't do. And they want to know our background. They don't want to confuse us with other professions. Okay, this slide comes from the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, and there are similar elsewhere, as professional bodies appropriately define and explore the expansion of scope of practice for individual professions. It shows how our scope of practice evolves with time and experience. And I find this diagram helpful for two main reasons. You may have some other reasons, and please put that in the Q&A as we're going along. First, for me, it shows that these two overlapping elements I mentioned, what's within my profession's scope of practice, but also what's within my individual scope of practice. I'll share an example from my own work. So it's within the scope of occupational therapy practice to splint a person's hand, for example, to regain movement, to do daily activities. I spent 7 years working in neurosciences and stroke. I did a lot of splinting, starting as a relative novice, but advancing in my practice as my knowledge and skills evolved with time and experience. But as an individual practitioner now, I haven't splinted for well over 15 years. It's probably longer. So even though it's within my profession's scope of practice, if I were to splint again as part of my individual scope of practice, I know I would need additional support, learning and training to do so. It's currently beyond my individual scope of practice to splint independently and safely. And I know that, and I know what I would need to do about that. Secondly, this diagram is helpful because it shows how, as we advance in our careers, our individual scope of practice grows and may extend beyond the traditional boundaries of our origin profession to meet service user needs. Thank you for that reaction. When I've shared this in other places, in different places, there is a different reaction and there is some discomfort around this concept. And it's very nuanced as well. So let's just spend a little bit of time thinking about this, but your reactions are really gratefully appreciated. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that individuals have the license to run free and wild. None of us do, and we can't just run off and do whatever we fancy doing. We must always work within the boundaries of our individual knowledge, skills and capabilities, and contracts of employment for those in substantive posts. Furthermore, an individual's scope of practice must not develop in isolation. Rather, an expanded role must be developed because it's actually addressing a service user need, and for those in employing organisations with organisational oversight, underpinned with effective workforce planning. So the latter includes considering the impact of expanding someone's scope of practice on the wider service to ensure the sustainability of these expanded roles. So by way of example, again, using my own career over the last 15 years, I've chosen to specialise in learning and workforce development to an extent that sits way beyond the traditional scope of occupational therapy and beyond the additional learning that I acquired in my pre-registration programme. So to this end, to practice safely and effectively, I've gained additional experiences. I've used supervision and coaching to reflect on what CPD I need to engage in to develop my knowledge and skills. And I've also gained additional qualifications. So for example, I took a postgraduate certificate in learning and teaching in higher education. More recently, I chose to go through the portfolio route with the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development to be recognised as a Chartered Fellow. And that's been really helpful for many reasons. But the point is, I can effectively evidence that I've grown my individual scope of practice safely by engaging in additional qualifications and experience, engaging in coaching and supervision. So I can show and evidence and articulate confidently that I'm meeting my regulatory standards. And I think that's the key issue. It's supporting people and thinking yourself about how can I articulate my narrative? How can I show the evidence and the experience and sometimes the additional qualifications that I've undertaken to keep my service users safe? And I know, and I can tell from the reactions I'm getting, that many of you, as my colleagues on this webinar today, will be able to share similar stories, including where you've individually expanded your scope of practice in clinical settings, in education research, in leadership roles, including with additional qualifications and through supported experiences. So again, I was going to stop here and ask you for a bit of a reaction. I've been getting some, but I'm going to ask for a thumbs up if you're comfortable with this, or another reaction that may better suit. And please put any comments or questions in the Q&A as we're going. Thank you. Okay, so moving on from understanding different scopes of practice, we're going to start wrapping up this section on levels of practice. But before we head to a vote, so please get your mobile phones ready because I'm going to ask you to vote on a few things in a moment. I want to explore the term. I think I said there were wrestled with the term at the start, the scope optimisation. It's a phrase that, I'm being honest, it didn't make much sense to me when I first heard it, and I've taken a while to unpick it. As registrants and managers, I would argue that scope optimisation is better defined as a concept that helps us make the best use of our time, knowledge and skills to benefit the people we serve. So this puts it within the context of our workplace. We should primarily seek to optimise our scope of practice to meet the needs of our service users. And also not just look at optimising our own scope of practice, but to do so for all members of the workforce, including support workers and technicians. Because if support workers and technicians, if we make the best use of their time and knowledge and skills, then it has a domino effect. It enables everybody else to be able to do the same. So when we talk about scope optimisation, please hold in mind it's about making the best use of all of our time to benefit the people we serve. I appreciate this is a busy slide, but I wanted to give you a detailed example of scope of practice across different levels. We've spoken about how scope of practice grows for individuals and for professions as we move through different levels. And I hope as I'm sharing these concepts, you're applying them to your unique careers. If you'd like to explore them in further detail, different levels of practice can be found in profession-specific and multi-professional resources. So this is the example from the British and Irish Orthoptic Society. You'll see that education levels or equivalent in experience are linked to different levels, and we'll be coming back to these later when we're talking about ways to support scope of practice. This is a diagram from the Paramedics Career Framework, published this version in 2025. You'll see how different levels of practice can map to different professional roles across sectors based on knowledge, skills and experience. And there are many examples and case studies provided by professional bodies. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to have a look at what your individual professional body or other professions that you work closely with and are aligned to. There's also multi-professional frameworks, and we'll touch on those later. This final one is from the radiography workforce. Again, you'll see it talks about enhanced, advanced consultant. I wanted to share this one because it's the 4th edition that was published in 2025. So that really emphasises the point we were making earlier, recognising that professions themselves evolve, and so do the range of roles within them. These examples within the professional development frameworks or career frameworks, whatever they're called, also serve as a reminder that scope of practice for individual professions is defined by regulators and professional bodies working together and not in isolation. So before we spend some time looking specifically at the advanced level of practice, I'd like to hear from you. This is your turn to vote. There's a selection of statements that can be accessed via the QR code on the screen or via the link. I think the link's going in the Q&A as well. Please could you spend a minute or so just giving us your initial thoughts to each statement. They are anonymous. And if you also want to use this time, add something in the Q&A. And please give me a thumbs up when you're ready to move on. We'll be gathering all of these votes. There's 3 lots of voting as we're going along. We'll be gathering them all up and I'll turn them into a digestible amount for you, and we'll be sharing them back with you shortly, alongside the copy of the slides, hopefully by the end of the week. Thank you. Okay, so now we've explored different levels of practice and scope of practice. We're going to focus on one level as an illustrative example. It's also the level of practice that's currently receiving most attention in workforce planning and regulation. That's the advanced level of practice. But a reminder here that advanced practice sits within a continuum, nested between enhanced or specialist and consultant. So I'd like to direct you to this statement. The live link is there in the bottom if you'd like to get to it straight away today. It's written by the Chief Allied Health Professions officers in each of the 4 UK countries. So they collaborated on this statement late last year to provide clarity on how advanced practice for AHPs is defined, regulated and governed. It was first published on the HCPC website at the end of last year. Please take time to read it and embed it into your workforce discussions and conversations. Later on, we'll be returning to this final point in the statement, the one that talks about robust employer governance is central to the safe and effective employment utilisation and deployment of advanced practice AHPs. We'll be talking later a bit more about the importance of a matrix of governance arrangements for safe and effective employment. Regulation is one part of a much larger public safety picture. So this statement provides an agreed definition of advanced practice for AHPs. It aligns with definitions that are country specific and other multi and uni-professional definitions too. I'd like to highlight the following words within this definition. Working within an advanced scope of practice involves complex decision making, postgraduate master's level education or equivalent, the 4 pillars of practice, which we'll revisit, and significant autonomy, judgment and responsibility. But remember that we're talking about autonomy as a defining feature across all levels and not a key feature for this one. To me, this also reinforces why scope of practice can't be a list of activities. You know, it's so much more. Its scope of practice as we become more advanced requires us to use our human skills, to be autonomous, our professional judgment skills, our advanced critical thinking skills, none of which as a sideways thought can be replicated by AI, and some of the activities that we are doing may be possible in the future, but it's that advanced level knowledge and skills and criticality that is so important. The 4 pillars of practice, I'm sure you're familiar, but to revisit, are clinical practice, facilitating learning, leadership, evidence research and development. This slide shares the version from NHS Education Scotland. And again, there is some variation in the terminology used in different spaces. So the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, for example, use the term professional practice to recognise their members work in many non-clinical settings like prisons, social care, local authorities, leisure centres, schools and so on. The size of each pillar will depend on your role, driven by the needs of your service users and the level of practice as shown here. Now, I know what I'm about to say next causes some discomfort, so please brace yourself, but the pillars can go up as well as down, depending on your individual scope of practice. So when I moved into academia, my facilitating learning and research pillars increased. My clinical pillar reduced in size over time. When I moved to work for my professional body, my leadership pillar grew. And whilst I utilised my research skills, that pillar stayed stable. So you have to see them as fluctuating concepts. Now, the 4 pillars of practice aren't compulsory from a regulator's perspective, but they can act as a really useful guide when thinking about optimising your scope of practice to support your professional development and your CPD to benefit the people you serve. You may want to look at what you want to do across all 4 pillars of practice in your roles. Here's another version of the pillars, linked to the levels of practice we discussed earlier. It's taken from the British Association of Arts Therapists, from their newly published career development framework. As we've seen with other profession-specific frameworks, there are potential to use these as registrants and as managers. We're sharing these with the managers as well to appropriately explore how to grow your scope of practice. And this is the other key thing. It's not just about moving up through levels of practice. Sometimes we may want to stay because some of us might not want to do that. You might want to stay at a level and widen your scope of practice and broaden it. Resources such as these frameworks also help us to identify areas for CPD. As we know, at the point of registration renewal, I've just had mine last month as an occupational therapist, we must show how our CPD has supported us to be safe and effective practitioners. Implicit in that is an expectation that our CPD activities align with our role and our scope of practice. And that's the thing we need to articulate clearly. So the notion that CPD must be aligned to our scope of practice is widely agreed across health and care professions. These 5 principles are from CPD Together, encompassing a collective voice from over 20 different health and care professional bodies and trade unions, including nursing, midwifery, and many of the professions regulated by HCPC. These principles also align with the GOsC CPD standards, including for osteopaths who are considered AHPs in England. Principle 4, CPD and lifelong learning should be balanced and relevant to each person's area of practice or employment, speaks to our discussions today. I'd also like to propose a small revision to Principle 1 to acknowledge that CPD is made possible and supported by employers where relevant, appreciating a significant percentage of registrants work independently. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with this figure. This version is from the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists on their professional development framework. There are versions of it in other places across Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland and in England. Please notice the horizontal axis of generalist to specialist in particular. This diagram helps us to understand that our scope of practice can be specialist, for example, working in a specialty such as neurosciences, staying within our origin profession, or building on our origin profession with additional learning and training. So we do have registrants who work in multi-professional roles, for example, transfusion practitioners. We can also work towards advanced generalist practice, for example, in primary care or the broader non-specialist elements of social care. The vertical arrows show the levels of practice that we discussed earlier. So when you get a copy of your slide, I'm not trying to preempt what your action should be, but when you get a copy of the slide after this webinar, one action would be, I would invite you to plot yourself on this diagram where you are now, but also maybe consider plotting other transitional career points when you've been promoted, you've taken a lateral move. I've done mine and it looks very non-linear and very messy as I've moved around the healthcare system, but it's a way of articulating your scope of practice. I want to bring this part of the discussion. Now, the slides have just disappeared, so I'm not quite sure why. I'm just going to press a button and see if they come back. I'm going to bring this, because there you go. I want to bring this part of the discussion and the webinar back to the practical realities of why we need to discuss these things. I'm glad the slide came back because this is one of my favourites. In research conducted by the HCPC, service users highlighted what they wanted to see from advanced practitioners. What is important to service users is that they are treated with respect by registrants who practice with compassion, kindness and empathy. They also want to know that experienced practitioners practice within their own limits and maintain their professional boundaries. Now, this research focused specifically on perceptions of some service users at the advanced level of practice. That was the commissioning framework for it, but the emergent themes arguably relate to all of us at any level of practice. So in this part of the webinar, we've explored the advanced level of practice in more detail, exploring the 4 pillars and the principles of CPD. Before we explore the third and final part, I'd like to hear from you. Please can you take time to answer these statements via the QR code and take time to put questions in the QA and a thumbs up for when you're ready. Thank you. I am aware of the time. I keep my eye on the clock as we go. I will make sure I deliver you home on time. The final part of this webinar seeks to place the discussion on scope of practice into a practical, broader context to discuss the support available and the responsibilities of others. These slides will have lots of links on them later, which you can look at leisure. We've explored that all registrants, at whatever stage of their professional journey, share precisely the same foundational standards on which to appropriately evolve scope of practice, depending on the needs of the different people and populations we serve. This slide shares some questions that I hope you can take away to help guide your professional judgment. Do I have the skills and knowledge? Do I need any other training to help me complete this? Is this activity restricted by law? Can I legally do it? Does my insurance cover it? In the companion webinar, we touch a bit more on insurance as well. If you have queries about your scope of practice, you may want to think, where is the best place to take my question? You might need to reflect on the extent to which you have the knowledge and skills to do something and use supervision to do that. If this is a question about whether you're legally allowed to do something, is it a regulatory question? Is it one specific to your profession or bound within your region, your local policies or your workplace? So it may be that you need to take your question to your line manager, your strategic lead if you're in an employing organisation, your professional body, your regulator, or a mixture of both, to seek answers for specific questions to guide your professional judgment. This for me is one of the most important slides. As discussed earlier, our scope of practice is an evolutionary process and one which happens within the context of work. Therefore, defining, maintaining and supporting safe practice for those registrants who are working in substantive posts also requires input from employing organisations. Being safe and effective is a shared directive. It's a partnership between registrants, employers, regulators, professional and national bodies for every level of practice, all working together within a broad legal framework. We've spoken about individual registrants and our responsibilities. We've shared the standards. I've given you examples from some of the resources from the professional bodies. So I'd like to spend a minute or two exploring the role of the employer. Employing organisations such as the NHS trusts, boards, local authorities play a central role in the safe and effective employment, utilisation and deployment of experienced practitioners as we advance in our careers and appropriately optimise and grow our scope of practice. You'll see in this diagram that employers are required to provide clear leadership structures for the advancing practice workforce, including from an executive director of AHP or a chief AHP or equivalent. There must be policies and processes in place, including for supervision, workforce planning and ongoing CPD. A set of robust arrangements, including accurate staff records and policies and processes to maintain public safety, especially as we meet and seek to meet the ever-changing and complex needs of the people we serve. Now, workforce development itself is an evolving endeavour. Organisations, as I'm sure you know, are at different levels of maturation in terms of developing policies and processes to support advancing levels of practice. There are resources available to support this work. I'll direct you to the link. There's organisational self-assessment tools. And as registrants working within the system, if you're working in an employing organisation, please seek clarification on the policies and the processes that are supporting advanced practice through your chief AHP or advancing practice lead if you have one, including for discussions on employment terms and conditions and pay. For those in the NHS in England, there's also the regional faculties for advancing practice where you can seek advice. So this is our final voting section for this webinar. There's a selection of statements. I'm sure you're used to what we're doing now. Please spend a minute or so rating against these statements. Add any questions into the chat and please give me a thumbs up when we're ready to move on. I do like how the first wave of reactions all come up at once. It's lovely. Thank you. Okay, the links on this page, you'll get them in, like I said, you'll get the slides, but if you want to have a look at any of these and grab them now whilst we're live, you can. Please click on any that you feel are of value. You can access them in your browser straight away. And like I said, you'll be getting the slides. I've mentioned some of the career frameworks, so there's a small sample of the library of resources that are available. There are some in the pipeline, so for example ODPs, the professional development frameworks currently being written and that'll be published early next year. You'll see here there's some multi-professional resources. There's one that focuses just on the education pillar, the AHP Education Career Framework. There's one that focuses specifically on research and consultant level and multi-professional ones. And you'll also see the NHSE Organisational Maturity Matrix. It's a tricky one to say when you're presenting, but that is the link that will take you to that self-assessment tool for organisations that I mentioned. You'll be getting all of these later this week. I want to attempt to pull all of this together. Thank you so much for your attention. I've tried really hard to keep it engaging and keep you captured because I know that we're sharing a huge amount with you. I'd like to try and pull it all together as we head to close. Levels of practice are important formal structures in employment. Regulatory standards apply across all of them. The HCPC and GOsC standards and scope of practice guidance apply to all registrants, irrespective of our job titles or seniority within an organisation. There's no separate additional regulatory framework or set of standards for registrants working at a higher level. Developing into more advanced levels of practice means developing new skills, working with greater autonomy and complexity across the 4 pillars of practice, always guided by service user needs, and our CPD needs to reflect this. And that final point there, safe and effective practice, including as we optimise our scope of practice, requires active input from registrants, the employer, the profession and the regulator. I'd like to hear from you one final time, and please post any final questions with 5 minutes left to go. We're going to be working through all of the questions. I know we've got a team at the moment trying to get to as many as we can. We are pulling together all of the questions across all of the webinars, and we'll be providing a fuller response as a follow-up in due course. Please also use the QR code to share with us this one action point and provide your initial response to the information and the relevance of it for today, and give me a thumbs up when you're ready. But we will be reading, every action point will be read, every question will be read, and there's a team of us working on this project, a project which started back in April. So as a reminder, this is the 6th webinar of 8, so we have 2 left, one for managers and one for yourselves as registrants. So if you haven't booked on for Monday the 3rd of November around supervision and delegation at advanced levels of practice, please do consider attending. We are recording these, we will make them available. So this has been part of a series. The link to book on the others is being posted in the chat. And please also share the link for those last 2 webinars widely with colleagues if you feel it would be relevant. We've been getting phenomenal numbers for this series. We're absolutely delighted with the reach that we've had. If you have any further questions for us as regulators, here are the key contacts for HCPC and GOsC. Please just drop an email into one of these associated boxes. And all that's left for me to say is a huge thank you for your time, and a personal thanks for the engagement. It makes all the difference when you're presenting to such large numbers. We'll be sending you a copy of the slides, a summary of the votes. They'll come out very soon. We'll be asking you for some follow-up questions. So if you leave and think, oh, I didn't make that point, there will be another link coming out in the email towards the end of the week. Put it in there. Again, the team will be reading them. And the second part of the project is to synthesize all of this information and develop resources to be completed in the spring, which will be new resources, signposting to existing ones to support you as registrants as you continue to advance in your careers. Thank you ever so much for your time and engagement today. Thank you, and bye-bye.